Hey, welcome back. Thank you again for joining us. We have a special guest today on the show, Tony Vanderberg. Did I say that right?
Vanderwilt.
Vanderwilt. Vanderwilt.
All my life. No problem.
Sorry. We are going to be talking about something super fun, which is creation. But before we jump in, I'm going to ask Pastor Tony if he'll just share a little bit about himself. So
Sure.
Tell us about yourself.
Yeah. So married, my wife, Jennifer, she's a local girl from Shakota. And so I've had a great marriage and two boys. Both of them are grown now. My youngest just got married here in April. And so both of them are married. So now we got two just incredible daughters as well that they married into the family. And so happy for them and happy to have them. And actually one grandchild. I know I look way too young to have grandchildren, but I've got one little grandchild now for my oldest. And so that's a lot of fun. So yeah, we're figuring out this transition, but yeah, it's great. Pastor at Cornerstone, which I always say God has a sense of humor, because I never saw that coming, and not necessarily something that I thought was in my DNA. But yeah, so been doing that at Cornerstone there for 10 years now, and they've been an incredible blessing to me and our life. And like you, went to DTS, and so just totally enjoyed my time there, and just a little bit deeper learning, and yeah, just love opportunities like this.
Well, I am so thankful that you agreed to come on. First off, I had another pastor tell me to reach out to him. I'm so glad I did. And we're just going to be talking about creation, which, doesn't take up too much of the Bible, right? It's really just the first couple chapters, but there's so much in there and so many different theology ideas to just dive into. So we're just going to jump in and try to tackle as much as we can right now. But first, I just want to point out that in the beginning, when any person opens up their Bible, they see that there is God, which we can't fully fathom that in the beginning there was God. And how does this characteristic about God help us know him more?
Yeah, so it's a good question, and you're probably going to answer that depending upon who you are.
Okay.
So anytime I especially think about Genesis, I think about it in sort of layers, and I also think about it in terms of individuals. How you approach Genesis is going to be as much an indicator of what you get out of Genesis as anything. So when I say that, for some, knowing that an unfathomable idea, in the beginning God, before time was, there's God, for some just blows them away. It's how do I even comprehend that? And to the point where some will say, well, it can't be true because it's outside of our existence. All we know is when things come into being, and there's a certain time for certain things, and that every one of us have an expiration date. So so for some, I would say that it helps to know that you have a God who is before me and before all things. Therefore, he is in control of all things. But then for others, and now I'm sort of speaking more towards Christians, then there are other Christians that when they see that, it humbles them to think that, it's like getting on an airplane and you leave and you look down and you realize I'm not as big as I thought I was. And so, so for some, it humbles them. And then I would say there's some that it pushes them away from the faith because they just say, I can't fathom or compute that. And therefore, when you tell me that before anything was, there was a God, my question that I want to ask is, where did God come from? And there's, in essence, there's no one that can answer that question. So instead of it having a humbling effect towards someone that we trust, it actually pushes them away to say, then, well, cannot be. And so, yeah, it's sort of layered, depending upon how you approach that. For me, because of in light of the whole of Scripture, it gives me incredible stability. So, yeah. don't know all there is to know. So he is there, and he was there before I was, and yeah. So for me, it gives incredible stability, but it's also humbling in a good way. Yeah.
And it's something that we can't prove. We believe it in faith, like you're saying. So yeah, I agree. It's very humbling to me as well, and encouraging to know that God was not born and he doesn't have an expiration date.
Yeah.
And he is in control, like you
Yeah.
said.
Yeah.
In Genesis chapter 1, verse 26, we read, "Let us make man in our image, in our likeness." And this is God speaking, but he's referring to himself in a plural sense.
Yeah.
Can you kind of touch base on that? What exactly is he saying?
Yeah, so there will be some that will question as to whether or not that's what Christians would define as the Trinity, Father, Son, Spirit, three in one. But I- it could help in when you look into the New Testament to say that you may look back and see that. But I don't think that that's what's going on there. It's probably closer to what's called, or at least I define it. I call it. I don't know if I would get that phrase right or not, but like a plural of majesty. So it speaks to the fullness or greatness of who He is. So when He speaks of us, it is in a plural, but it's in a plural sense of fullness, plural of majesty, the greatness of who I am, which does fit in the context if you think about He is the one who um, made and created all things, because He is this full and incredible great God in that sense. The reason I say that too is because when you talk about Genesis, one of the things that you have to really come to grips with is you have to think about who is the audience that the author is writing to. And one of the things that you have to take into account, if you don't, I think you'll miss the point. In my opinion, you'll miss the point, is that he's speaking to a people who live in a pluralistic, polyistic society. So, you ask the question, who's he speaking to? Well, their questions are, why is it that you would call me out to one true God? Now, as Christians, we don't ever think about that, because we think, well, one God, one God, one God. But that's because we think we enter into the text thinking as a Christian. But if you would stop and say, well, wait a minute, if I was in the culture of an Israelite who's coming out of Egypt, who is in a polytheistic environment where I've got a God for everything. So why is it that, I don't mean this badly, but if you look around today, you've got certain things that you're good at. I've got certain things that I'm good at, but I'm not good at all things. So why is it that I wouldn't come to you for the things you're good at and come to me for the things that I'm good at?
Yeah.
Well, if you translate that into God, little g gods, well, why would I go to one God if I can go to Sun God, who specializes in the sun? Why would I not go to the fertility God, who specializes in that? You know what I mean? So in the Old Testament, you do not see the doctrine of Trinity in the Old Testament. That doesn't mean it's not there. It just means that it's not brought to the forefront. And the reason it's not brought to the forefront is because if it is, they're not going to interpret or understand it as God intends. They would understand it more in a polyistic thinking, three gods. They wouldn't think of it in terms of one, three in one. And so that's why I think you don't see that. So I think in that particular passage that us there is not a Trinitarian idea so much as it is speaking about the fullness and the majesty of who this God is. But I think that they would come in and say, no, we're talking about one God, and that's really what, when you come to the New Testament, that's really what, they've got a beef with Jesus about. You're claiming to be God. There's only one true God. How is it that you can claim to be God? And so all that stuff is coming into play.
So I love that you brought up to read the Bible with the context of the original reader. And in saying that, the original reader would have understood that Moses is writing that there's something different about this God.
Mhm.
That this God, like you're saying, is a majestic God and we don't need all these other gods.
Mhm.
Is that kind of what you're saying? How
Yeah,
to take?
absolutely. People come in, I know we're gonna get into this later, so, why not jump in now? Um, People are gonna come in and question a lot about what's evolution, what do you think about days? What do you think about, um, well, what questions are being answered, and to whom? And if you don't take that context into account, you just you just you ask the text to say something that it's not trying to say. I'm not saying that you may not go back and see it, but that's not what it's trying to say. So, again, if you look at Egypt and the plagues of Egypt, and you look at, I mean, all of it is so connected. Think about, we may get there, we may not, but you think about, what we know as the fall. So when we read about the fall and we read about the serpent coming in, which for us is classified as snake, um, when our context that we bring into it is what we know about snakes. But what does an Israelite think about when he hears snake? Everything is good, everything is great. In comes this serpent. What is it that they think about? Well, the first thing they're going to think about is probably, we were in the wilderness and we messed up and we were bit by serpents and the serpent was put on a pole. Well, you've just entered into a story. I would love to be a movie guy, director, because I would say you've just entered into a story to a people who, when they see serpent, they say, "Whoa, Adam, don't do this. Whoa, 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 don't do this." I mean, it just brings about a high for them that engages them into the text because they know Adam and Eve are naive. We can define what that means later, but they're looking at it and they're just screaming at the television, right? No, 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 no. Um, but then the context shows all that,
Yes.
right? As far as what is. So I don't even remember what the question is, but I just
Well, I
where
think
we
we were
were.
going, no, that was great because it's so important to understand who the author was speaking to,
Yeah,
not just us.
yeah,
When we go and we're
yeah,
like, well, this is my life now. And how does
yeah,
it fit into the
yeah,
Bible, right? Which
yeah.
we lose so much when we do that. So thank you for helping us understand what's actually going on and helping us understand what God meant when he said, let us make man in
Yeah,
our
yeah.
image. And you just brought up the fall.
Mhm.
So I know this is something that I kind of asked you about earlier. And we can go so many different directions with this, but Jesus being God and the Holy Spirit being God, right? They were always no beginning, no end, always. But with the fall, do you believe that Jesus knew before the fall of man that he would come, step into humanity, die on a cross? Or do you think that this was a solution made after the fall?
That's a great question, which most 40 plus, people much older than me, um, would say, of course he knew. But I was visiting with some college students and I asked them that, is this something that came up? And then, basically God rolled the dice and he's looking to see what comes up. And when he sees what comes up, then he has to respond and react to what comes up. So it's a question of, what does God know ahead of time? Now, there's a lot of reasons why people probably think that he didn't know, because if he did, why did he do it? Now, I think Genesis 1 through 3 explains all that. Um, I really think that he explains all of that in Genesis 1 through 3 as to what exactly is going on. But you got to sort of really plow through all that ground. Um, but it's important an important question, because some will go, well, John 1, chapter 1, in the beginning was the word was with God, the word was God. And then when you keep on reading and you see that the word is referring to Jesus, you say, oh, wait, Jesus was at the beginning of creation. Well, what do I got to do about that? Because, you know, how does that play into all this? So it's not as short of an answer. I could turn to the Bible verse and say, yes, he knew. But I think the bigger thing is I think Genesis 1 actually is showing that redemption was in God's mind before anything ever came to be.
Okay.
And the reason I say that is because of how I understand Genesis 1, 2, 1, Genesis 1, 1, Genesis 1, 2, and then Genesis 1, 3, and following. And how you take those three particular passages is going to determine a lot on whether or not you see that in the text. So I see salvation in Genesis 1. I see redemption in Genesis 1. That's what I see happening.
During creation.
In creation. In creation. Now, that's not popular. I mean, you know, you may get some dislikes on that. Okay.
Where do you see that?
So you got to come to a decision on what you think is 1:1, 1:2, and 1:3 is saying.
Okay.
So 1:1 in the beginning. I probably should have brought my Bible home. I've got it on my phone. So
it's in your memory.
I wish it was, but you know.
And I mean, we could even talk in this same context about Satan. You know, did God already know about the fall, and why was Satan created? You know, there's so much to this.
Yeah, no, and no, that's exactly right, because there's just so much to unpack to get the fullness of it, though. I originally, before I really started thinking through, you know, Genesis 1, 2, and 3, I always would say, well, if it was my plan, I wouldn't put the snake in the garden.
Yeah.
Why would you even do it then? You know what I'm saying? Yeah. Why would you just not do that? You know? But that's a big part of the point in relation to what's going on. Anyway, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. What is that? Some will hold that is God. That's the first action of God. In other words, in the beginning, God created. That's the first action of God. It's telling us now, okay, this God, he doesn't say spoke, but God created. Bam, he created. Okay. And then 2, the earth was without form and void, darkness over the surface of the deep. So you've got, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. And so you've got this, for lack of a better term, undeveloped state. God created, and there's this undeveloped state. And then 3, God said, let there be light. So now we're going to start, you know. So some will take that to mean that's what it is. 1 is God's first act. It's his first action. And everything that comes out from 2 forward is building out of, growing out of Genesis 1. Okay. Now I don't hold that, but that's one theory. Another theory is that you've got this action, and then in between 1, 1 and 1, 2, you've got some sort of something happened. They call it gap. Mm-hmm. There's this gap theory that something happened in between there, that now the earth was without form and it's void. And so now you've got problems now. And between 1, 1 and 1, 2, so in 1, 1, God acted, and now in 1, 2, there's a big gap here.
And some believe time.
And some believe time in that to allow for well, I don't know why everybody asks that question, but a lot of times the reason they ask for that question is because they've got in their head fit in millions, billions of years because of what we've seen science to show us. And so some may enter that into it, but I think the reality is that thought came before even the second thought came.
Okay.
The thought came that there may be a gap there came before there was ever this age problem, time problem, you know, that people are trying to deal with. But they see a gap there, and then they say, okay, now everything's messed up. And now from that, God comes in and says, let there be light, and all those kinds of things. The way I understand it and see it, and I don't mind giving you a couple of reasons why, but almost all of my thinking comes. I don't know if you know Dr. Allman from DTS.
No.
He's a professor there, and then Alan Ross, um, I think it's Salheimer, has got some. Almost all of my thinking is gleaned through some of them. So I'm not trying to be original here because I'm not. Um, but the 1:1 is actually a title, if you will. The way we would think about it is a title. This is what we're going to talk about. It's not an action, a specific action, but it's a title. This is what we're going to talk about. We see this in other ancient literature. We also see this even in like in the New Testament. Mark would probably be an example where you sort of have this first initial, hey, this is what we're going to talk about.
Okay.
So we're going to talk about creation. Okay. And then they pull back the curtains of the stage and they say the earth was formless and void. And they're not telling you when they pick the story up. They're just saying this is the state of the earth. Mm-hmm. Now I'm holding that in verse 2, there is something incredibly, terribly wrong.
Okay.
Okay. Meaning that
so when we say the fall in Genesis 3, you're saying there's already been something happen.
Well, there's not been because of the way that the text follows, there's not necessarily been something that's happened with man.
Okay.
But something's gone on in this earth, this created place. There's something that's gone on that we haven't been told what it is.
Could that maybe be the issue with Satan?
So, the short answer is yes. The longer answer is I don't like to dwell on questions that the Bible doesn't specify.
Mm-hmm. Sometimes I do.
No. It's not that I don't. I don't enjoy it. But what happens is the more I speculate, oh, well, then this is that, and this is this, and this is that, then I get a framework where I get a very big, elaborate house. But the only problem is the house is built on cards. Mm-hmm. So if I knock off a couple of things at the bottom, the whole house falls down.
Yeah.
And I concern myself just a little bit because if I go that direction too far, then I start missing the point. Now, so here's what I'll tell you. The reason I think that is in such some sort of a destructive state is because, and most concordances will have this, is there's a reference to Jeremiah 4. Well, in Jeremiah 4, I don't know of very many that would not connect Jeremiah 4 with Jeremiah talking about connecting what he's talking about to Genesis 1. He speaks in the reverse order. So in Genesis 1, where you've got, for example, plants, animals, humans, he goes in the exact reverse order.
Okay.
And then he's talking about this destructive state, and he uses, as far as I know as well, he uses, the reason it's so tightly connected is he uses the same phrase in the original as what's in Genesis 1:2. So if I'm reading in Jeremiah 4 and I'm saying, well, wait a minute, I can't get around the fact that he is talking here about Genesis 1, chapter 1. Now I want to know, well, then how does he see it? How's he making this connection? Well, he says that this is under the wrath of God.
In Genesis chapter.
Well, he's in Jeremiah 4. His conclusion as to these things is because it's because of the wrath of God. Now he's connecting it obviously into other things, and he's talking to him about captivity and certain things like that. But his example, if you will, is Genesis 1.
Okay, very interesting.
So now all of a sudden, well, why is it that you're looking at this chaotic, destructive state, and then we say, well, why is that? And you're saying it's God's wrath. So at a minimum, I can't get around that in Genesis 1, chapter 1, verse 2, there's something terribly wrong. And it appears to me, from Jeremiah 4 that is because there's some sort of under God's wrath.
Okay.
Now, I think it is plausible to go to Isaiah and to go to Ezekiel and say, well, maybe the fall happened, not the fall, but maybe Lucifer, as we know, angelic, an angel in heaven, maybe this is what's happened. Maybe that fits that. And the answer is, yeah, that's plausible, but I can't make close enough connections to say that, yes, that's absolutely what happened. And so I don't want to go there because I don't see a close enough connection for me personally to have confidence to say, yeah, that's exactly what happened there. But what I can say is, in verse 2, I am very confident that this is a mess that is not right. It's not right. Now, for me, that's incredibly important because then if you look at the following verses, it makes sense because what's God doing in the rest of the chapter?
Creating.
Well, he's not just creating. He is filling. He is taking what was chaotic and correcting it.
That's a great point.
So if you see now that you've got, oh, wait a minute, you've got a God who came in and he brings in out of formlessness and chaos, he corrects it and brings order and brings fills. Well, then all of a sudden 2:1 makes sense. Because now when we look at Sabbath, what do we know now Sabbath is?
Well, when we read it the way, just chronologically, without all of these ideas, we think, oh, well, God didn't need to rest, right?
Yeah, I know. That's what.
But you're so your point is so great that there is obviously an issue already because he points this out for us.
Yes. That's now everybody's going to agree with me, and I don't want you to get hate mail. There's going to be Christians that are, but I think part of the reasons why Christians are so hard on that, as far as I don't want to accept that, is because I've then got to deal with, I've got to deal with this chaotic whatever before creation, what I understand is creation, and then they also have a hard time in then. So, you're saying then that there's, billions of years could have existed and happened, and you're saying I'm just saying that what I see is that God gives us this is what we're going to talk about. Mm-hmm. This is the state whenever we're going to start talking. And now here's what God does, boom, in fixing that state. And I have personal confidence to see and conviction to see that's there. Mm-hmm. And then when we get to Sabbath, it makes Sabbath fit the whole. Mm-hmm. Why did God rest? That has come up before, and I don't mean this badly, but people have said before, well, if God needed to rest, so did I. God needed nothing.
Yeah. So
what is Sabbath? It's Sabbath is, we could have a whole episode on Sabbath, because Sabbath is interesting because in Sabbath, number one, Sabbath isn't just a day. Sabbath, you have a 7th-year Sabbath, you have a 49-year Sabbath, you have a 50-year Sabbath. What's happening in all those things? No work is being done. What do you work for? You work to create, you work to produce, you work to have fulfillment, you work to have all of these things. Well, so then why did God rest? And the answer to me is there's nothing more to do. Salvation is complete. Everything that I intended has been done. What more could I do? Well, so Sabbath's in the 10 Commandments, and you see, 10 Commandments on the walls and everything else. But it's interesting because as far as I've found, Sabbath isn't commanded in the New Testament.
Yeah.
Well, that is, I'm a pastor, so that doesn't mean that we're not supposed to meet. Okay.
Keep coming to church, right?
Yeah. But I don't get that principle from the Sabbath principle. Why is that? Well, because New Testament, I believe, teaches that Christ is our Sabbath. Well, what does that mean? And my understanding is that means that Christ is our salvation. It is a work that He has done that we rest in
Continuously.
And so then when you start thinking about Sabbath, I think of it in terms of past, present, future. So there was a past Sabbath in which was a garden-like state. There's no sin. There is no there's perfection in the sense of fullness. We can talk about that more later too. I don't think it's perfection like we think about it, but it's perfection in the sense of fullness. So past, and we get to experience that a little bit every now and again. So every now and again, we have opportunities to experience and go back to the garden on this earth. What do I mean by that? I've said this to our congregation last week or so ago. Have you ever worked and you look up and time has flown by? You've lost time. Well, what is that? You've been so engaged in your work and purposeful and full and enjoy, and you're locked into that moment so much that time has disappeared. Well, guess what? You just tasted a little bit of the Garden of Eden. Anytime we experience that, we've got the opportunity to think, God just gave me a gift of Eden. So past, but we have a present where we say, yeah, but that's not my experience all the time. And I would say, yeah, that's exactly right. So in Hebrews 4, it talks about be careful to enter into that rest, that Sabbath rest. We're in a here and now in which we don't have full Sabbath because I don't want to speak heresy here. While Christ's work is finished, He hasn't fully extended that work. So we are in the midst of hardship and sin and struggle and suffering and all those things. And He says, be careful in what you place faith, trust in. Be careful what you think about these things. Be careful that you enter into that future rest. And so then you see in Revelation where you've got, again, a reversal where it's basically taking us back to the garden. You've got a tree planted in the middle of heaven. Well, how is it that we get from past to future? And the answer is that Christ, who is now, is our Sabbath. He has completed a work that we cannot do. He has completed salvation that we cannot do. It's a completed work already, but it's not yet fully experienced because we are not in that final state. But yet He gives us the opportunity, which is connected to Genesis 1:2, to grow in knowledge and ability and what a Christian would call sanctification, what he calls in terms of perfection, becoming conformed into the image of the likeness of His Son. So all of that is connected to creation and Sabbath. In what I see, I mean, to me, it's like the old. You're too young for this, but it's like the old numbered dots, and you don't see a picture yet, but you start connecting the dots.
Yeah.
And when it's done, all of a sudden you see this picture. For me, you really, the dots are too closely connected. At first, you don't see it, but when you connect all of the dots, and you make sure those dots, you go from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4, all of a sudden it brings out this picture that, for me, was like, where have I been my entire life?
And it's one story and it all ties together.
Yeah, it's like, well, wow, that makes sense.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
That was so good. I think we're going to finish this on another podcast.
Okay.
So, Genesis chapter 1 and 2, talking about how it ties into the entire Bible. That was so good. And then we're going to pick back up with the creation of man, kind of talk about men and women and all of that. So thank you so much for sharing all of that.
Yeah.
If you guys listened on the YouTube channel, please subscribe. And if you're on a podcast platform, share this with your friends, leave a comment, and we're going to get him back on the show. So we'll see you guys soon. Thank you.